My talk is called Frankenstein, Astro Boy, and the Genealogy of the Narrative of Posthuman Adolescence. Okay, there we are. Okay. So by the 1990s, Frankenstein had emerged as a foundational narrative of posthuman identity. One offspring of Shelley's novel, Osamu Tezuka's The Birth of Astro Boy, has proven especially effective in reframing the Frankenstein myth for young readers. By tracing Astro Boy's origins to a car crash, Tezuka evokes a powerful emblem of independence among youth and an equally powerful source of anxiety for parents. While Tezuka touches only lightly on the relationship between young people and cars, that will come later, he does address parental expectations as well as questions of rights that apply equally to unemancipated minors and the artificial beings whose status has yet to be codified into law. Although Peter Dickinson's Eva is the first YA novel to use a car crash to explore these concerns from the perspective of a cyborg teen, it takes 2 decades before another generation of texts, Mary E. Pearson's The Adoration of Jenna Fox and Robin Wasserman's Frozen, constructs the young crash survivor's subjectivity in the computational terms that reflect the phenomenological, social, and legal implications of integrating humans and intelligent machines. Over the next 40 minutes, I'd like to trace this trajectory of the Frankenstein creation narrative in YA literature, with an emphasis on the appeal of the non-survivable car crash as a thought experiment about the implications of imposing posthuman subjectivity on non-consenting teens. For most of us, human-like non-humans, monsters, golems, automata, are uncanny reminders of the fragile ontological status of humanity. The proximity of Frankenstein's creature to these figures is well established, but the influence of Shelley's novel on representations of posthuman subjectivity stems from the near-human status the creature acquires through speech. The epigraph from Paradise Lost, "Did I request thee, maker, from my clay to mold me man?" anticipates that the monster will escape the category of the inarticulate and soulless non-person and raise questions about a creator's responsibility towards a non-consenting creation. In framing the narratives thus, Shelley troubles the distinction between the human and the non-human and anticipates critical posthumanism's concern with our ethical responsibility towards non-humans. To be clear, the immediate allure of Frankenstein for adolescent readers originates elsewhere. Most importantly, the epigraph inaugurates 2 narrative patterns that are familiar from later YA fiction. The first is the search for identity. After finding a trove of literature, the creature considers various identities before settling on 2 from Paradise Lost. At times, an Adam seeking a mate, and at other times, a defiant Satan determined to destroy his maker. Victor's creature rehearses 2 familiar patterns from YA literature: the search for social and romantic connection, and the assertion of individuality in defiance of authority. A second pattern lies in the negotiations between the wayward child who seeks recognition and the disappointed parent who withholds it. Although Victor imagines that, quote, a new species would bless him as its creator, upon seeing this creature awaken, his hopes evaporate and he recoils in breathless horror and disgust. For the creature, a mate would make amends for Victor's betrayal. But in contrast to most YA novels, the rivalry between child and parent, or in this case, creation and creator, escalates to the point where no reconciliation is possible. Given these qualities, it's no surprise that Frankenstein would appeal to young readers, or that it would court controversy. As Chris Baldick notes, the first dramatic adaptation, The Fate of Frankenstein, provoked anxiety about potential harm to youth, leading to pleas that fathers forbid their families from attending performances. Parental misgivings notwithstanding, Frankenstein gained currency among youth in the early 20th century, first through film and later through print, television, and music. James Whale's 1931 classic established the iconic representation of the creature as inarticulate, flat-headed, and violent. Although the creature is partly rehabilitated in The Bride of Frankenstein and the classic's illustrated version of Shelley's work, Whale's representation is largely confirmed by Universal Pictures throughout the 30s and 40s before being reinforced by Hammer Films starting in the late 1950s. At the same time, the figure was domesticated in family-friendly productions like The Munsters and The Addams Family. By the beginning of this century, Frankenstein had been repackaged, adapted, and simplified for younger readers, and included in high school curricula, where it has served as a frequent source of pedagogical research. By now, Frankenstein has consolidated its status among young readers as a modern myth. At the same time, it has undertaken new cultural work. While some of this is undeniably regressive, the Frankenstein myth has also been the site of some progressive adaptations, including Mr. Creature, Chris Priestley's grim account of the creature's relationship with a young pickpocket. Having emerged from Whale's shadow, Frankenstein's creature now draws less ambivalence than his, or sometimes her, counterpart in Shelley's novel. In their account of children's and YA adaptations of Frankenstein, Karen Coates and Farinor Sands characterize adaptations for older teens as addressing, quote, the terrible consequences of attempting to defy death. While I think this is true, here I'm interested in treatments of the Frankenstein myth that go further than Coates and Norris suggest. In these works, defying death is the starting point for developing an ethical stance towards posthuman beings. Here, the path to posthuman adolescence runs from a non-survivable car crash through a high-tech charnel house that reconstructs the teen using surgical, mechanical, and computational interventions. The figure that emerges provides at least three rich pathways of inquiry into adolescent posthumanity. First, as a living entity conceived in purely material terms, what Rosie Braidotti called Zoe, the figure challenges the ontological category of the human. Second, as a being whose cyborgian construction imposes a subjectivity that is qualitatively different from that of biological humans, the posthuman teen presents significant representational challenges. And third, as a discomfiting successor to the legal minor who could previously lay claim to various social roles, offspring, sibling, peer, the figure raises questions about our ethical responsibilities to non-human beings. In each case, the creature's modern counterpart allows the writer to develop the ethical and phenomenological potential of Shelley's novel in ways that are particularly resonant for adolescents on the brink of a posthuman era. Astro Boy represents an important inflection point on the path from Frankenstein's creature to the posthuman adolescent. Published in 1975, The Birth of Astro Boy connects a familiar origin story to contemporary anxieties about the dangers of technology. A prologue presents a speculative history of robots, beginning with their industrial uses in the post-war era, through the processes of computerization and anthropomorphic design, culminating in the robot's relegation to a class of quasi-human servants. Having established the terms for Astro Boy's origin story, Tezuka discloses his misgivings about science, musing, "I wonder if our science-based civilization has really made people any happier." Visually and verbally, the prologue expresses ambivalence about intelligent, self-directing robots. Although Tezuka's robots are mostly smiling and cheerful schoolchildren and workers, two violent and oversized figures visually dominate the early panels. One, a backlit metal monster that menaces the viewer, and the other, a figure gleefully beating a man. Although the manga's verbal track emphasizes pro-social qualities, the one emotion identified as emanating directly from the internal life of robots is a capacity to get mad, a detail suggesting anxiety about the unpredictability of artificial beings. And so, Tezuka imagines laws that ensure robots abide by their status as useful servants, an emphasis that diverges from the English dub of the 1963 anime, at the time the most familiar version of the story, which ends by proclaiming a robot Bill of Rights. Technological ambivalence aside, the Birth of Astro Boy remains mostly faithful to the 1963 anime. Dr. Tenma's 9-year-old son, Tobio, dies when a truck strikes the hovercar he is driving. Here, the crash is a simple accident, but later anime strengthen the link between Tobio's death and anxieties about children and technology. In the 1980 version, Toby disobeys his distracted and negligent father and crashes on his way to an amusement park, an approach that is reprised in 2003 when an older, defiant Tobio runs away on a hoverbike. Upon learning of Tobio's death, Dr. Tenma, in his grief, decides to recreate his son. In both the 1975 manga and the 1963 anime, the moment of the robot's creation draws heavily on the cinematic imagery of Whale's movie. Tenma's motive, however, is framed less as an attempt to become God than as a project of creating a perfect replacement, a robot identical to you, as Tenma says, but with an immortal body. The departure from Frankenstein's search for the elixir of life is crucial, for it places the narrative in the domestic sphere where parent-child relations can be emphasized. Although the gulf between creator and creation is underscored by the absence of blood ties and the sense that the new child has been created for instrumental reasons, Tenma is haunted by the memory of Tobio. Encouraged to call Tenma Papa, the robot fares well until his inventor notices his creation can't grow. Children, it seems, never mature as quickly as their parents want. Enraged, Tenma renounces parenthood and sells Tobio to an unscrupulous promoter. Stripped of clothes so he looks less human and can't, quote, assert some weird rights, Tobio is renamed Astro and forced to perform in a circus until he is rescued by Professor Ochanomizu, who signals his emancipation by saying, "From now on, you're no longer a slave to be bought and sold." Under his new father's guidance, Astro hones his physical powers, acquires 60 languages, and learns to sense whether people are good or bad. And so begin Astro Boy's many adventures. The Birth of Astro Boy thus represents a specification of the Frankenstein myth to the concerns of younger readers. While the uncomplicated Astro Boy feels none of the alienation from his own body that has been identified as a hallmark of the posthuman adolescent, he still resides on the borders of humanity, more than a machine, but not quite a person. By raising the question of robot rights, Tezuka frames Astro Boy's status as a child and creation in distinctly modern terms, as a legal one. That neither the phenomenological implications of Astro Boy's mechanical embodiment nor his position in society is developed is little surprise, given the story's brevity and the primary readership. These considerations await further treatment in novels aimed at older readers. Eva Begins, as its focalizer, awakens in hospital after a horrific car crash. Immobilized at first by paralytic drugs, Eva learns that doctors have transferred her neural patterns into the emptied brain of the chimpanzee Kelly. The accident marks not a moment of rupture where a human child is replaced by an artificial one, but a juncture where a non-consenting minor is transformed into a hybrid who remembers but can't recover her past self. Restricting the narrative to events after the crash allows Dickinson to acknowledge that irrecoverable self while exploring a complex web of social and legal considerations and attempting, possibly for the first time in YA literature, a sustained representation of a post-human subject position. From the outset, Eva challenges the Enlightenment model of identity with its emphasis on autonomy, self-awareness, and authenticity. The novel's explicitly articulated position locates identity in an informational pattern, quote, an arrangement different from any other pattern that ever was or will be. Without the anchoring presence of an irreducible soul or other essential human quality, the emphasis on pattern renders the process of neural transfer uncannily reminiscent of the transhumanist fantasy presented by Hans Moravec in Mind Children. Moravec imagines a scenario in which the subject passes through a process that reads her neural patterns as it destroys her brain. Once these patterns have been transferred to an artificial body, the subject awakens essentially unchanged. It is, of course, too good to be true. The self as information model is immediately discarded in favor of a model more closely aligned with the critical posthumanism of Haraway, Hales, and Braidotti. Here, identity is an epiphenomenon emerging from the interaction between informational pattern and embodiment that is further modified by and distributed across an array of social and technological relations. Post-crash Eva's first experiences are storyless dreams of trees, species memories that may be written into the structure of chimpanzee brains. The Eva who awakens is already a version of Donna Haraway's cyborg, a human consciousness shaped by chimpanzee's embodiment, including a chimp's sensorium and endocrine system. Once she is disconnected from the IVs that have kept her alive, Eva is able to survive only because of the drugs that prevent her unconscious mind from rejecting her new body. Her partial reintegration into society further depends on prostheses, a keyboard and a voice synthesizer, clothing, and drugs that prevent estrus. This hybridity renders Eva ontologically ambiguous. To all chimps and many humans, Eva is a chimpanzee. To her family and friends, she is a disturbingly embodied teen who sometimes acts in inexplicably animal-like ways. Eva's hybridity leads to significant representational challenges. As focalizer, Eva is convincing only to the extent that Dickinson balances her chimpanzee and human components. Dickinson's formal solution is to foreground the human at the expense of the chimpanzee. This is usually handled discursively through Eva's tendency to assess her chimp-like qualities from the perspective of an ethologist. On some occasions, however, chimp Eva takes over completely, turning human Eva into a powerless observer who reasserts control only after the fact. At one such point, Eva goes on a rampage after being denied the company of other chimps, an act that prompts her father to pull out a stun gun to subdue her as he would any other unruly animal. These disparate natures are never at peace with one another, and Eva's commitment to the liberal humanist project of developing an autonomous self prevents her from accepting her own hybridity. The tension between chimp and human identities is first suggested in the metaphor of the ghost, a term Eva's physiotherapist uses to describe the shadowy and confusing memory of Eva's human body. Eva reflects, as long as the ghost of that other body haunted her, she would never become a whole person. At the same time, Eva understands that chimps have none of the autonomy humans struggle to construct, and that the solitary chimp is, quote, a kind of ghost, not quite real. The metaphor of the ghost emerges whenever Eva is haunted by the humanity she rejects, as when the ghost feelings get too strong and she needs an extra shot of drugs to control her panic. In her final hours, however, the ghost wins. Eva is ambushed by the sound of a voice on the synthesizer and feels, quote, the pang of ancient loss, as she remembers a child with long black hair ice skating in a yellow tracksuit. From that past comes a voice. Me, whispered the ghost, the real Eva. The novel ends at an impasse with the admission that the satisfying, hybridized human self remains an elusive, even unattainable goal. Although representing Eva's posthuman hybridity demands considerable representational adroitness, Dickinson's main real-world occupation is with the rights of children and animals. In a society where animals can be owned, but people can't, Eva's hybrid identity foregrounds the question of how rights are alienated in market economies. Since there is no paperwork for the transfer of Kelly to Eva's parents, Eva's body belongs to the research pool, making that part of her, quote, an extremely valuable piece of property. When Eva learns that she has contractual obligations to participate in media projects for the corporation that has paid for the transfer of her neural patterns, she asks, "Who do I belong to?" The corporate lawyer, Jane Calloway, replies that courts would eventually affirm Eva's human status, but notes that litigation would prove expensive, thereby making a veiled threat to ensure Eva's compliance with corporate wishes. After Eva's outburst at a press conference, Calloway's threat becomes explicit, and Eva is forbidden from communicating with organizations seeking to return chimps to the wild. Eva's status as minor thus aligns the adolescent subject, the artificial being, and the animal in ways that rarely apply in literature focusing on adult subjects. At 13, Eva has limited rights of self-determination. The fact that the transfer of neuron memory was applied when Eva was unconscious is a technicality, since her parents act as legal decision makers well after Eva awakens. The horrors of imposing the procedure on non-consenting minors and equally non-consenting chimpanzees are underscored by the fates of other subjects who, upon awakening, screamed for 9 days and then died. Calloway notes that any litigation to determine Eva's status would be complicated by the fact that Kelly's body is only 6, a detail that could extend Eva's minority another 7 years. Here, as in so much later YA literature of the posthuman, the decisions parents make impose lifelong disenfranchisement and even corporate ownership on the child. In a significant extension of the representation of posthumanity in Astro Boy, Eva vividly details the experience of one such non-consenting posthuman adolescent and prepares the way for others. In Eva, one of the parents is driving when the accident occurs, and Eva herself has no responsibility. In The Adoration of Jenna Fox, the accident not only demarcates the phenomenological, legal, and social boundary between the unmodified teen and the posthuman cyborg, it invokes anxiety surrounding the transition to adulthood. Such accidents have been the subject of American teen tragedy songs dating back to the 1950s. These songs attribute car crashes to adolescent rebellion, sexual activity, or prematurely assuming adult responsibility. In the case of Jenna Fox, the accident stems from Jenna's struggle to assert her independence in the face of her parents' crushing expectations. It is also, tellingly, the crux of a potential court case to determine Jenna's legal culpability in the death of her friends Locke and Kara, and the reason why Jenna's parents preserve the disembodied consciousnesses of the two dead witnesses. Like Eva, Jenna awakens from a coma without any memory of the crash. Hints of Jenna's cyborgian reconstruction soon emerge. Jenna is unscarred. She has no sense of taste. She isn't tired by physical labor. Although she is an amnesiac who at first doesn't recognize her family or remember her past, Jenna can recite Wikipedia-like accounts of historic events and soon starts re-experiencing events from her early infancy. The novel is half over before she learns that 90% of her body is comprised of mechanical and bioengineered components, and that the only part of her brain that was salvageable, the pons, has been augmented by 500 billion neurochips. Jenna's reconstruction leaves her haunted by the anxiety only touched upon in The Birth of Astro Boy and entirely absent from Eva, that given the chance, parents would fix or replace their imperfect children. In reconstructing Jenna, Matthew and Claire Fox eliminate a childhood scar, shorten their daughter to make her a better ballet dancer, at least this is Jenna's interpretation, and upload information to improve her academic performance. They also implant the compulsion to obey the command, "Go to your room," a decision they justify in terms of Jenna's safety, but seems designed to suppress their daughter's rebelliousness and ensure Jenna remains forever compliant. While the details of Jenna's reconstruction speak to anxieties about parental expectations, they also align Pearson's posthumanism with Moravec's transhumanist project of preserving an autonomous Cartesian mind in a body that transcends biology. To be clear, there are concessions to the phenomenological implications of artificial embodiment, but these relate mostly to perception and memory. Post-crash Eva knows the precise number of raindrops hitting her window and perceives to the millisecond changes in facial expressions. Changes to Jenna's memory prove more significant. Not only does she remember her infancy, her program knowledge doesn't decay, and she will always quote Walden perfectly. And yet, for all these alterations, Jenna remains as recognizably human as Geordi LaForge in Star Trek The Next Generation. The novel closes with the bioengineered Jenna, now 277 but still looking 17, contemplating the costs of longevity. All the experiential differences between the elderly Jenna and you and me are due to her durable body, improved sensorium, and undecaying mind. No instinctive fear of snakes or chimpanzees' dreams come into play, and Jenna is untroubled by her own hybridity. In keeping with its transhumanist sensibilities, the adoration of Jenna Fox embraces the belief that some essential quality defines the human. As the backups Jenna finds of herself, Kara, and Locke demonstrate, identity can be copied. But the backups are less than human because, as Matthew Fox insists, information is not the mind. Although there's evidence that the backups are conscious, they aren't people, and never will be because they can't be reconstituted in organic bodies. Thus, the idea of the human, with all the rights the category entails, falls back on an essentialist model of genetics and embodiment. Although this particular essentialism is muddied by a hankering after an immaterial soul, which Jenna's parents locate in the ponds, belief in an irreducible organic essence paves the way for the Jenna standard, the legal redefinition of the human as pertaining 10% of their original biological material. As evidenced in Jenna's destruction of the backups, Pearson's shifting definition of humanity entails legal peril for non-consenting minors and artificial beings alike. In the first sequel, The Fox Inheritance, Kara and Locke are revived in artificial bodies, a move that revises the narrative's initial position on human exceptionalism and retroactively turns Jenna into a mass murderer. But before that, and before the Jenna standard is established, Jenna herself inhabits the category of the less than human. The surgery places Jenna beyond the lifetime limit for medical procedures, making her into an illegal entity at risk of incarceration or dismantling. For a while at least, cyborgian embodiment makes Jenna into a perpetual child doomed to a clandestine life and excluded from the categories of the human, the adult, and the citizen. Although Pearson's two sequels address the question of rights of artificial beings and the question of being dependent on proprietary technology, these books are not Jenna Fox. In the end, despite its interest in what it means to be human and what it means to be a partially enfranchised teen struggling to assert independence, the adoration of Jenna Fox does what liberal humanism has always done, but Eva refuses to. It justifies continued rights exclusions by adjusting the definition of the human. 6 months after the publication of Jenna Fox, a very different representation of posthuman adolescence appeared. Robin Wasserman's Frozen is narrated by Leah Kahn, a privileged 17-year-old whose defiance of an overbearing father leads to a non-survivable car crash. In another variation of Moravec's consciousness upload, Leah's mind is transferred to an artificial body, turning her into a Skinner, or mech. Post-crash Leah discovers that her sister Zoe has usurped her position as favorite daughter and high school queen bee and begun dating her boyfriend, Walker. Subjected to technology her father controls, Leah enters the legal gray zone that applies to recipients of the download procedure. It is here that Wasserman explores the phenomenological and social implications of her version of posthuman adolescence, while mounting a larger critique of the exclusionary practices upon which American society and liberal humanism depend. The accident occurs after Zoe blackmails her sister into taking her volunteer shift by threatening to tell Mr. Kahn that Leah spent the weekend with Walker rather than studying. The accident has no legal implications, but it tears apart the Kahn family. Leah's loss of status confirms what her father's frosty demeanor has always implied, that she simply isn't good enough. For his part, Mr. Kahn, unable to accept post-crash Leah, accepts Zoe's misguided attempts at replacing her sister. As in Jenna Fox, the download procedure is exploited by parents to control their children. Leah's father makes it clear that if Leah destroys herself, he will download a backup consciousness into a new body, and that this practice will continue after Leah turns 18. Another mech, the suicidal Sloane, suspects that her parents have already re-embodied her, possibly multiple times. Other recipients, sickly and disabled orphans from the racialized minorities living in the radioactive cities, are coerced by Biomax into undergoing experimental download processes, only to awaken in Caucasian bodies, adding a further layer of alienation. In an exercise of Foucauldian biopower, control over the adolescent extends to the phenomenology of artificial embodiment. Leah's simplified nervous system mutes her physical sensations. She can't smell or taste, doesn't tire, and registers touch more as data than sensation. The absence of an endocrine system means she feels emotions less intensely than biological humans do, a state that may extend to sexual desire. Attempting to understand her muted responses leads Leah to the philosopher and psychologist William James, who attributes motion to bodily symptoms and argues that there is no mind stuff out of which the emotion can be constituted. This loss of emotion isn't absolute, nor could it be in a novel that hopes to engage readers' sympathies. Although Leah's acerbic personality emphasizes observation and judgment over feeling, moments that assume prior bodily symptoms abound, even if the narrative avoids reporting those symptoms. As it turns out, Biomax constructs mechs so that only extreme danger and physical trauma induce fear and pain, a policy that leads Leah and the artificial friends into self-mutilation and thrill-seeking. That this tamping down of sensation is a deliberate mode of control is made clear by the existence of black market programs that induce intense physical and emotional hallucinations. In Leah's America, the download process isn't widely accepted, and the belief in some essential quality that applies only to the organically embodied leads to widespread prejudice. Download recipients are denied gendered pronouns, called Frankensteins and freaks, ostracized in ways similar to racialized minorities, people with disabilities, and those with LGBTQ identities. In a moment that anticipates present-day culture wars over trans athletes, Leah is expelled from her high school track team on the grounds of fairness. Leah's social media provider declares her deceased, cancels her account, and deletes her postings. Faithers, a group of religious zealots who see download recipients as soulless machines, work to deprive them of rights. In a striking series of illustrations of Leah's exclusion from the category of the human, a faither, a friend's boyfriend, and a Biomax technician sexually assault Leah, each justifying his actions by identifying Leah as a thing, not a person. And yet, despite attempts at designating them as non-human, mechs are not so different from other people. The wealthy in Leah's America embrace transhuman improvement through pharmacology, genetic engineering, and surgery. Those who can afford it pay to correct their offspring's genetic faults and determine physical appearance and intelligence. Teens live in a haze of behavior-modifying drugs, while adults compulsively preserve youthfulness through surgery. Meanwhile, the poor surrender their vote to corporations in exchange for a life of indentured servitude in corp towns. And the radioactive cities are home mainly to impoverished racial minorities. The fact that in an America based on wealth inequality, the download process is applied only to minors taken from the ranks of the disabled, the dying, and the racially marginalized, while the wealthy embrace nearly unfettered body modification, reveals the stark need for a rethink of the exclusionary practices attendant on imagining a privileged category of the fully human. So I've been exploring how the Frankenstein creation myth has been evolving into a myth of recreation suited to a posthuman era. Using the car crash as the inciting incident in YA novels domesticates the Frankenstein myth, locating the drama in the tension between the adolescent's desire for independence and the parent's resistance to that desire. While it may be tempting to read the posthuman adolescent as a stand-in for all unmodified teens, I think the converse is more accurate. The biologically constituted teen is a stand-in for the posthuman and non-human beings generally. What the legal minor, the animal, and the cyborg have in common is that they are already excluded, legally and socially, from full personhood. They already submit without consent to the will of adults. And they are already subject to the exclusionary practices by which society polices the boundaries of the human. At the same time, it is important to remember that these writers are novelists, not philosophers. As such, they task themselves with representing as vividly as possible characters grappling with social realities, and with developing discursive tools that can represent the experiences of these characters, be they human-animal hybrids or mechanical computational beings, in ways that challenge our liberal humanist assumptions of what it means to be a self. In 1977, E.F. Sand wrote, 500 years of humanism may be coming to an end as humanism transforms itself into something we must helplessly call posthumanism. I think that these writers would all agree, though not, perhaps, with the word helplessly. Thank you for your time. I'd be happy to have a little chat now.
Yes, thank you very much, Rick, for sharing those readings with us and this research with us. I think it's so urgent right now when we hear more and more, there's more and more research conducted on young people's interactions with AI friends. I think it's really relevant to think indeed how YA literature, YA culture may encourage also young people's, well, but not just young people's, but I think adults as well, reflection on those interactions. I think it might be it might offer us useful insights to think about them. And now we have time for questions, indeed. And we have the first one. Yes, please. There is a raised hand from Abderrahim. If I'm pronouncing the first name correctly, I apologize if I'm not. Please. Mm-hmm. You can unmute yourself. Okay, maybe we'll wait for this question. There is.
Stop sharing my window, maybe.
Yes. And Joe, please.
Hey, Joe.
Hi, Justina. Thank you. Hi, Rick. How nice to see you.
Nice to see you too.
This has been such a delight. I've known you for years as a friend. I haven't ever seen you give a talk before, and it was elegantly constructed and super interesting. Thank you indeed. Just one observation I'm going to throw out really briefly is that there was a very famous, widely read literary instance of a car crash affecting a child and it being really important to the story. at the beginning of the 20th century with
Oh,
Pollyanna. That
okay.
happens in the around the emotional climax of that novel. I can't imagine that Tezuka read Pollyanna, considering the relationship between Japan and the U.S. at the time, but it's possible. That would be kind of interesting to find out. Anyway, the question I have for you regards just the novel Eva. Um, and I'm, Eva is kind of the go-to novel for posthumanism in YA literature that kind of everybody has to name check it at some point. So I was really glad to see you give it such sustained attention here. I wonder, how do you think that the focalizer's experience with sex and reproduction, which happens quite late in the novel, intersect with the novel's posthumanism? For example, do you think that the reader is asked to accept her as a mature chimpanzee to the exclusion of a human minor, right? Which would sort of, in a weird way, invert the humanism, but still reassert that boundary. Do you think that the novel relies on a fetishization of the line between human
Mm.
animal and non-human animal for the emotional reaction that it wants from the reader?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I'm going to try to address it, but first I want to say that Eva is the text that creeps out my students most. And it's because of the sex, I think, right? I think that Dickens, as I remember, Dickinson sort of cheats a little bit because we jump from the moment that everything is established to the 5 pages where Eva dies. So I'm not sure that there's enough there for me to. I mean, I guess what I would say is that maybe Dickinson is aware of the difficult territory he's in, and of course, it's in for humans it's a very private thing. For chimps, not so much. So I don't really have an answer, except I think that maybe Dickinson was uncomfortable and sort of sidestepped the issue by not narrating those 20-something years.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, you're exactly right. It happens off screen in that part that he cheats. I think that's the right word for it. Okay, thanks, Rick. Lovely seeing you.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you, Rick. Elaine, please.
Hey, Elaine.
Hi, nice to see you, Rick. And how lovely that you're in Poland, a country I really enjoy. I have a question. I guess I'm going to talk about Eva too, because it's the book I know best. Although I'm excited to read Astro Boy, I did not know it. I think it's really interesting. I don't know whether this is amusing or a question, but I think some of how we want to land on Eva depends on where we think her unconscious or subconscious mind is. Because on one hand, she knows she has to embrace, she consciously knows, I've got to embrace this chimp body or I'm going to die. But that only works, as it seems to be explained in the novel, because of her early association with chimps, that she became comfortable with them in a way that those of us who haven't touched a chimp could never be. So they say at one point that, before she was 3, she probably thought of herself as a chimp. So that was kind of ingrained in her subconscious. But at the same time, as you note, you have the ghost that comes back of her memories of being a human girl. And I just think that's so interesting because when we're thinking of who are you really, I think it kind of has to go to the subconscious, not the part you decide to play, or the identity that you are given, but what you feel really deep inside. But I think in this novel, it's really hard to determine that somehow. Anyway, I'm just throwing that out there, that we have 2 ways of looking at her unconscious, of where she stands. And it's almost like we have to, as the reader, decide which one is most important.
Right. And I think that it's worth making the point. I mean, I think that when people talk about posthumanism, they always trot out this sort of autonomous, Cartesian, self-aware mind, right? that nobody's really believed in that since Freud, right? Because whatever you think of Freud, he brings in the idea of the unconscious, right? So already autonomy is challenged by the idea of an unconsciousness, right? In Eva's case, I think the unconsciousness, as I read the text, whatever Eva is, she's distributed, right? And partly she's distributed, as I suggested, there's technology, there's chimp embodiment, chimp hormones, and so on. There's a human rationality, if you like, and a human facility with language, okay? As for the unconscious, it's tricky because part of her unconsciousness is clearly a chimp unconscious, right? And that's where the dreams come from. Yes, and she knows that Kelly never had those dreams because Kelly's never seen a tree. So she feels almost sort of Jungian in terms of a deep structure there. On the other hand, there's clearly a human unconscious that probably aligns more with sort of Freudian psychoanalytic theory, that needs to be repressed by drugs. So what I think here is a traffic between different species unconsciousnesses and Eva's conscious mind. And there are times when the non-verbal chimpanzee takes over, right? And Eva suddenly reacts in instinctive ways, right? So my sense is that what's really good about Dickinson, aside from the question of rights, is he attempts to imagine, it's a thought experiment, what it would be like to be distributed across different species and having these different incommensurate competitions going on in your behavior. So I'm not sure it's possible to say who Eva is. She's kind of she's kind of an epiphenomenon that shifts and shimmers, but it's above all of these other considerations. That's my read. Does that make sense, Elaine?
What's that? Yeah.
Does that make sense?
No, I think it's really interesting, thought experiment, as you say. And I can attest that students are very uncomfortable with this thought experience. Is one of the books that I can say that has been very unpopular that I have offered over the years. And I think it just makes people too uneasy.
No. I'd love to offer it for exactly that reason.
Yeah, sure.
Your class is a little bit big. Give them Eva as the first text, and maybe a few people will drop out. No, it's my experience entirely, like that students are really creeped out by it.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much for the question and for the answer. Do we have any other comments, questions? I can't see any questions or comments in the chat.
Dang.
Do we? If I may have just a comment, I really like this exchange about how unpopular this novel is, but it just, I think, testifies to its potential, right? And indeed, we should be disturbed, right? I mean, not just, I think, let's say younger readers, students, but I think it's just the power of this text that is so amazing in a way. And it shows its currency. Right? Incredible, really, right? That it was published so long ago, and now this currency is becoming so obvious in a way, right?
Oddly, it may be Dickinson's most sort of canonical novel. He said that most of the letters he got were from school students who had read Eva.
Yes, Elaine, yes.
Just real brief, I met Peter Dickinson at CHLA one year when he was the speaker, and I kind of cornered him. And he basically said, everybody wants to talk about Eva. He felt that The Kin was his best novel. And I'm like, maybe writers shouldn't be the ones who judge which of their books are the best. That's fine, but it's not as good as Eva. But anyway, he told me that he had always thought of himself as an animal from an early age, and he never deviated from that. I don't know how much that could possibly be true, but it's an interesting observation, I think, just to add to the mix.
Thank you. Again, do we have any further comments, questions? If I may have just a question about Astro Boy, and it's actually about the animated film from 2009. I was just wondering if it in any way updates, if that's the right word, the manga, right, or the earlier series. Whether you have any thoughts on that.
I haven't seen the whole film. I've watched the beginning. And as I remember, that's the one where the rogue military robot kills him, right? He gets locked in a some sort of lab and is destroyed that way. My sense is people hate that film mostly. So yeah, have you seen it, Justina?
No, I haven't. I've just had a look at the some clips, and that's not something I would like to watch, I guess. But maybe for the sake of research, I should.
I found 5 minutes enough. Sorry. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Ada. Please.
Hi. Yeah. Thank you, Rick, for your talk. I enjoyed it very much, and I would like. I mean, I'm not. I was thinking it was very interesting in the beginning when you talked about the creator and the parents, so that we have a kind of parallel perspective into the creator that creates the new half human or hybrid child figure, and also that we think about the parents and how much power and how much influence they would take up to build their children. So that's maybe something I would like to hear more about, also because it could be connected with children's rights. I mean, in your talk we look very much into animal identity and human identity, but also it really on the meta level it kind of brings us back to what are the rights of children, what age do they have, what kind of right, and how do they free themselves in a way from the expectations and the creation the parents have in their mind when they have their children. So maybe bring it a little bit on the meta level of what is the parents' role, or images of parents that are in these novels or films. And also, do you see some connection to children who want to connect more with their rights and their own identity?
Right. So one of the things I struggle a little bit with is Frankenstein, and I think partly because the Paradise Lost is lurking so much in the background. It really is creator and creation, but at the same time, people do tend to refer to those two in terms of parent-child relations. My own read is that one of the kind of curious things that happens with this whole car crash narrative is that it simultaneously allows for the child focalizer, and it's almost always a child focalizer, to project anxieties onto, like, their own anxieties about not living up to parental expectations, but then also to some extent the way in which as teens we have a tendency to kind of demonize our parents. So there is that perspective. The other reason I think that the car crash matters so much is because it's the source of parental anxiety about what teens are getting up to in the back seats of cars, basically, right? So it's this moment of it's this borderline between the child and the adult, with the teen always pushing for the status of the adult, but partly through the sort of proxy of the car, I think, and the parent denying the status of the adult by, trying to deny the teen the car. The question of where the actual border lies is a really interesting one, and I think it's always been sort of fraught. I'm probably not really addressing your question, but I am reminded of there's a book super important. It's actually kind of lurking in the background of a lot of posthuman theory, though hardly anybody does very much with it. It's C.B. Macpherson's theory of possessive individualism. And he talks about basically what it is to be like a full citizen, right? And he talks about how certain categories were excluded from the franchise in the 17th century based on their owing their labor to landlords or being wards of the state, charity victims. So he talks an awful lot about the difficulty of that kind of liminal band. The odd thing is I remember he never mentions the child. So it's kind of his blind spot. And it sort of feels to me like one of the things that's always happening with these sort of posthuman critiques is there's always an attempt to shift the inclusive category a little bit further. And I think one of the things that perhaps, I'm not sure about this, but perhaps writing aimed at older people, like a mature audience, tends to neglect is the child in all of that. And it just sort of feels to me like these are texts where that border is placed right through the child, but oddly, the child finds themselves often on the wrong side of that border, but with a whole bunch of companions who are animals, artificial beings, and so on and so forth. I'm just spinning my wheels here, Ada.
Yeah, it's good. I mean, I really like to listen to it, and as you know, I'm not so much into posthuman humanism as you are. But I still find it super interesting also in, the whole creation and also the name of Eva in the context of Genesis. Yeah. There's not only the child, but, for me as not being as much in posthumanism, I'm thinking of, okay, well, how does it reflect back on the question who we are as humans and where we come from and what role we have or where the power is or the obedience is. So that's all very interesting. What you say. So, maybe it wasn't all about the children's rights, what I just mentioned, but, the positioning in it, what you just said. And just as a comment, it is a very sad topic, but I thought, bringing in the songs, that was really something really nice with the car accidents when you mentioned the songs. So, but it's so interesting that we have all these cultural associations from these old songs or somewhere and bring it into these books. And that's really resonating with me without knowing all the layers of it. So thank you.
Thank you very much for the question. Just a small remark. I think Macarena Garcia Gonzalez, she, in some publication, she has indeed pointed out about Rossi Braidotti that Braidotti mentions those minor peoples, as she says. I think I got the quote right, but children are not included. Mm-hmm. So that's you are perfectly right, Rick. I think I would agree as well that this is also how I think children's literature research, YA literature research, can contribute to maybe to a broader discussions in the field of posthumanism, new materialism, indeed. Do we have another question? I think someone wanted to make a comment. Rabaha, I think it was. It was very brief, so I'm not sure. Mm-hmm. Okay, sure. Maybe it was. Yes, yes, please. Mm-hmm.
It's just a very quick question. I forgot to write down the name of the author of the book, Eva. So if I could have that would be great. Thanks.
Sure. It's Peter Dickinson, Dickinson.
Got it. Thank you.
Mm-hmm, thank you. And just one more, just a small remark. Sorry, just maybe a little bit of a digression, but maybe relevant as well. There is this film, the Spanish film, The Spirit of the Beehive. Maybe you're familiar with it, but from 1973. And in it, in a small village in Spain, I think it's set maybe in earlier years a little bit, but there is I know someone comes with a kind of drive-in cinema or something like that. And there is this screening of Frankenstein from 1931, the film, right? And we can actually see bits of the film. And we see children watching, children in the audience. And we see how fascinated they are with this figure of Frankenstein. And I won't do any spoilers here, but I think the film also sheds an interesting light on this shared status of the figure of Frankenstein, and I mean also on how marginalized these creatures are. Both, I mean, children and the strange being. So maybe it's worth just having a look. Just for this motif of marginalization and maybe some kind of empowerment in a way that the girl gets through watching the film and somehow in her imagination connecting with this figure.